increased European population. That's what I was talking to you guys about with this right here. Okay? During this time period, you're in this industrialized phase. Now, it starts in places like England with the agricultural revolution, this explosion of population in England, which is why you've got so many Englishmen that start moving to the cities, or they just move all the way across to America. As time moves on, the areas that are whose population is exploding is the Eastern Europeans, moving into, I don't know, anywhere that they can find work, anywhere they can find jobs, which is the reason that so many of them make their way to the coast and book passage on some ship and end up coming into America, into this place called Ellis Island. Okay, so growth of cities and urban life, migration from Europe. From 1850 to 1940, 60 million people left Europe. And what was the number one destination? New York City. Okay, and of course when they came in, where did they come into? Where in New York City? Ellis Island, where they were all processed. So like, if you happen to be of European descent and you figure that your family immigrated to the United States during that time period, if you ever wanted to go do any kind of genealogical research, you would go to Ellis Island, you'd go check their computerized records to be able to find where and when and at what point did your family come in. Once you find the records, you would get like place of birth would be listed. So, Chris, you got family that came in during that time period? In the Crimean War?
Yeah, because my grandma's dad was 60 when he had her, and his dad was 60 when he had him. So he was able to be able to do the sharpshooter and start like.
For who? British? For the English? Then it would not have been a sharpshooter in the charge of the Light Brigade. Do you know what unit he was in? You just know that he was in the Battle of Balaclava.
Yeah, he's the last known survivor.
So was he in the Light Brigade
no,
or just
in the Light Brigade, but he's more of like soldiers attack at that time.
We gotta talk. That's fun. Okay. Okay, the biggest places they went to: United States, Argentina, Brazil, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. I mean, obviously, if you're British, you're going to go to Canada, Australia, New Zealand. But you know, the British, no, the Canadians. I read an interesting article somewhere. In an effort to try to get people to migrate to central Canada, the Canadians sent around a number of advertisements. Encouraging people to buy a farm or just come and take over this land in Canada, this great farmland, and of course it might have had a picture saying, you know, you can grow wheat here, and then it mentioned that it's as far north as like London. And you know, if you're an Englishman and you're thinking, as far north as London, that's not that bad. I could live there. And so you have all of these people thinking nice southern British coastline type weather. You're going to get a lot of rain, but it's not going to be too cold. And moving out to way out in Manitoba, where in the winters it's getting down to 40 degrees below zero most every winter. Way out north. So people ended up settling in Canada with the expectation that it was not going to be anywhere near as cold as it actually was. There you go. I know. Okay. Second industrial revolution is going on during this time period. So, you go from steam power to electrical power. The development of the light bulb. Once you have the light bulb, then you can run things at night. Once you've got the light bulb, you can actually have movies. Internal combustion engines and diesel engines are being developed during this time period. The invention of the car becomes more and more popular. Eventually, the aircraft is invented during this time period. Is militarized slightly, but it really becomes a military thing during World War I. submarines that had been invented originally. I think the idea was invented during the American Revolution. The first operational sub, the Confederate States ship Unley. Can't remember if they actually sunk any Allied or any Union ships, but the submarine that had been developed or discovered before was actually turned into a weapon during this time period, and so the Germans tinkering with it. So the second industrial revolution that we've already talked about, significance of corporations was that people had the ability to invest money into large companies. Companies with large amounts of money would be able to do much bigger expansion later on, build into things. Mass production was a big thing. Free trade in England, especially, but also elsewhere around the world. You have the rise of a global economy, advance of democracy, so this extension of the voting to the working class, and you see this in most countries with democratic views. In the United States, there's not actually any real expansion of voting rights during this time period, but there's a lot of discussion as to giving the right to vote to women. And so Emmeline Pankhurst and in America, Susan B. Anthony. Who gives women the right to vote first? What nation? It's actually on our next chapter. It is during World War II that Great Britain gives women the right to vote. I'm sorry, during World War I. It is right after World War I that women are given the right to vote in the United States. And then it's 1945 that France eventually gives women the right to vote. But the interesting thing, which state of the United States gives women the right to vote first? Wyoming. It's Wyoming. Okay, so here's the deal with Wyoming. You think that Wyoming needs pretty wallflowers, or does Wyoming need strong, active women? Strong, active women. In other words, there's a desire in Wyoming to try to attract whoever they could, woman-like, to come to Wyoming, so that these women would marry the local men and would start popping out babies. That they figured that the territorial legislature figured that was the only way that they would be able to get over 60,000 people living in Wyoming. Why is 60,000 that important number? In order to be a state, you got to have 60,000, and so Wyoming granted women the right to vote as a territory. Eventually, when it became a state, they eventually took away the right to vote, sort of for women. I don't remember exactly who and where and at what level, but there you go. Now, the other thing here, the creation of a welfare state. A welfare state is a society where the government takes on some of the responsibilities for the welfare of the people. Okay? So the things that we expect with a welfare state, some kind of old age pensions, some kind of workplace protection, where if you were injured on the job, then the government is going to make sure that you're cared for. Public education, you could argue, is an aspect of the welfare state, but where it is the government's responsibility to maintain the well-being of society. That is a welfare state. Before in these industrialized economies, there never would have been a welfare state. You're taken care of by your home, by your family, or by your community. But once you get this, Otto von Bismarck creating the first old age pension system, where 65-year-old, where once someone hit the age of 65, the government would pay for their old age pension. And why would you pick 65? That's because everyone is already dead. The vast majority of people, by the time they get to 65, have been dead for like 6 years. And that's why 65 was picked. Nowadays, people are expected to live far beyond 65. But back in the day, very few people ever lived that long. So one of the statistics that I heard, and I don't remember exactly what it was, Eddie, statistic that I heard, I want you to wrap your brain around this. It's like as of about 10 years ago, that of all of the people in human history that ever reached the age of 65, 2/3 of them were still alive. Let me repeat that again. Of all of the people in the history of mankind that have ever gotten to the age of 65, 2/3 of them were still alive. Either you're still asleep, or you kind of wrapped your brain around it, or you're still trying to figure it out. That means of every single person who had ever gotten to the age of 65, so few of them ever succeeded in reaching that age years ago, that it was just unheard of. I mean, yeah, okay, fine, like Voltaire, he lived long. Ben Franklin lived to be like 117 or something. Not really. But so few people ever lived to be that age, only if they were very, very well fed and well taken care of. Working people would die at the age of 35. But anyway, that's the development of welfare state. Some of the other things coming out at this time period. The appeal of socialism. By the 1800s or 1880s, most socialist parties were Marxist, especially in Germany and France, but they were not very successful in Great Britain, of course, because in Great Britain you've got a lot more political rights, this expansion of rights. And so the government is stepping in to make sure that factory life, that working in factories is going to be a little bit safer. The government was taking care of a lot of the things that the socialists had wanted, which is one of the reasons why there was no need to turn to Marxism, because what the socialists had wanted was going to be taken care of by non-Marxist means. You also have faith in science alone. Science is at the core of this phase of industrialization. There's new wonders of daily life. Charles Darwin publishes Origin of the Species, develops this idea of survival of the fittest. From that, you get Herbert Spencer takes Darwin's ideas of survival of the fittest and starts trying to explain it as part of human society. So this is where we get social Darwinism. And then, of course, from this, it is expanded on and becomes more of a nationalistic thing, so moving into racial nationalism. Eugenics. What is eugenics? Imagine. Okay. We have a golden retriever. She's a very old dog, but whatever. Golden retrievers. Why is my golden retriever different from some dog that you might have? Genetics. They were bred to be that way. What exactly were golden retrievers bred to be able to do? To go retrieve things in water. Okay, which is why they were bred to have a longer coat. They were bred to be able to swim happily and easily. They were bred to go get things, to run through stuff, go retrieve waterfowl, and bring them back to whoever it is that shot them. Okay? It's a golden retriever. What about a terrier? Well, terriers were bred to go kill varmints, rats, like a rat terrier. And so they're tenacious and they like to dig. They like to go follow animals down wherever it is. Okay? Different dogs were bred for different purposes. Make sense? It's possible to breed traits in and breed traits out. Well, just as people have done with dogs, the whole science of eugenics is based on considering animals, or considering people like any other kind of an animal. So if we recognize that there are certain traits, why shouldn't we encourage certain kinds of people to breed more? And so this is this science. I mean, it's a science. Let's use scientific principles to determine certain people that should be married, certain people that should not be married, certain people that should and should not have children. It used to be that people had to have blood tests before they got married. I don't really understand exact reasons why, but to make sure that you did not have certain traits that were not compatible. And so the mentally handicapped, in many cases, would be forbidden from having children, or would be forbidden from getting married. There have been a number of programs, especially in this country, where if people were on welfare rolls, or if people were convicted of things, that they would be sterilized, either required to take medication or have tubes tied or things like that, to make sure that they could not have children, because they were trying to breed out certain undesirable characteristics from people. How's that? One of the early proponents of eugenics was Margaret Sanger. Okay, Margaret Sanger, what do we know her for? Planned Parenthood. One of the early pushes for the birth control pill was so that certain undesirable people, or that certain undesirable traits among many, very frequently this was applied to minorities, that certain undesirable traits would be bred out of human society. That was the goal of it. Now, maybe it was not as, I mean, it sounds like wicked, evil, twisted Nazi science, because this is something that the Nazis were very, very involved in doing research into. But this is one of those. This is one of those things. Of course, after the Nazis, eugenics became a bad word in America, probably as it should have been. But notice this is like science completely devoid of morality, what should be, of human rights issues, but of trying to make sure that human life is improved. Newtonian science turned on its head. So Einstein's theory of relativity, Max Planck's quantum physics, and again, you read about this in your book. New kinds of science are developed and turned into more of a professional thing. So anthropology, archaeology, the study of not just written history, but the study of non-written history. So the idea of doing an archaeological dig, if you were to participate in an archaeological dig, you're using science to try to figure out how did people live a long time ago before everyone knew how to read and write. Psychology is developed heavily. Ivan Pavlov, or Pavlov's dogs, the conditioned response, and so trying to figure out how do people think. So the conditioned responses, what Pavlov did to try to figure out. I don't remember exactly what it was that he was going for, just trying to see how the patterns of behavior could be developed. But the experiments that he did is he had a group of dogs. He would ring a bell, and as soon as the bell was rung, the dogs would be fed. And they did this every single time at mealtime. And eventually they could ring a bell and notice that the dogs would simply start salivating because they had this response that was conditioned. Sigmund Freud, and the work of Sigmund Freud becomes a normal kind of a thing during this time period, where you're trying to look at every single scientific thing that you can look at. And frankly, there's some crazy science that comes out during this time period, like phrenology is the study of the shape of a person's head, that by studying the shape of a person's head, you should be able to see which part of their brains is the most developed, is the most advanced, and so somehow there's personality that you should be able to tell just simply by feeling a person's head. So some of the science of this time period, like eugenics, has been completely debunked, whereas some of the other of the sciences that came out during this time period are actually significant. New trends in philosophy, such as agnosticism, nihilism, Friedrich Nietzsche, with what he did, coming up with this idea of the Superman, that was huge during this time period. Irrationalism, existentialism. Now, honestly, I do not understand a lot of this area or this era of philosophy nearly as well as I should. So existentialism, like, for what point is is existentialism. If you look at number 12 there, the internal religious struggles during this time period, the modernist versus the fundamentalist. Max Renan writes the book The Life of Christ, where basically he tried to apply modern scientific thought to the Bible, and basically came out with the argument that said, this cannot be fake, it's probably just a literary thing, but basically argued that the miracles in the Bible could not have happened because they violate scientific principles and scientific knowledge. And so you get this clash, a cleavage, a split between modernism and fundamentalism. And modernism is following, everything should be rational and scientific, and we should be able to use, realism to understand everything that's in the Bible, versus the traditional religious thought, the traditional conservative religious thought that said there are certain fundamentals in the Bible, and there's 5 specific fundamentals, and I can never remember what they all were, the 5 specific fundamentals of biblical truth that you should be able to see. And so fundamentalism would include like the virgin birth of Jesus, the truth of the miracles that were there, that Jesus was raised from the dead, so the resurrection of Christ. These are things that did not work with modern thought. They only work with fundamentalist thought. Now, it's an ongoing evolution, this beginning of this split in Europe. In America, there is a very specific moment where you can say, here is the event of the split. If any of you are familiar with the story, with the play, Inherit the Wind, any of you guys have ever heard that? Some guy named John Scopes, with the Scopes monkey trial, was an event in 1925 in Tennessee where John Scopes was a biology teacher and taught evolutionary thought, and the local school board threw the book at him, got him in trouble. This huge, major, internationally acclaimed court case takes place. We've got Clarence Darrow representing the school board, and you've got William Jennings Bryan representing, Bryan is representing the school board, Clarence Darrow is representing John Scopes. John Scopes is found not guilty. John Scopes is found guilty of breaking state law, and that afternoon, right there in the trial, William Jennings Bryan, this guy that had run for president, very, very, very well known, drops dead right there in the courthouse. It's crazy. Anyway, it's the rise of fundamentalism as an American force here. As everything is going on, anti-Semitism, so the Dreyfus Affair takes place during this. Theodor Herzl writes the book Der Judenstaat, or the Jewish State, in 1896, and so Zionism becomes a thing, a big political event, political thing right here. But bear in mind, Zionism as a political movement is no different than any other political movement of any other ethnic minority that was trying to get their own individual nation state. So this Irish move for independence during this time period, Magyarization, the Hungarians trying to get more separation between them and the rest of Austria to create this independent Hungarian state, the Czechs trying to get their independence. All of these are examples of racial nationalism that to a large extent Zionism in 1896 is simply a part of. The women's movement is a big thing. So Emmeline Pankhurst trying to get the right to vote, which again is successful during World War I in England, in the 19th Amendment in America in 1945 in France. The new imperialism, I think we talked about imperialism if you remember the DBQ that we looked at yesterday, and then this big rise for militarism with this glorification of war. If warfare is the struggle that creates, that determines, that defines who a people is, then war must be great, war must be good. And frankly, if you look at the imperialistic conflicts that are taking place where a European nation beats up on some African tribe or East Asian people or something like that, then it seems to look like that European nation is great and powerful, and wonderful, much as an older sibling is going to feel great about himself if he beats up on his little brother, right? Yeah. Okay, guys, make sure you've done